In the shadows of a war-torn compound in Afghanistan, where trust was currency and betrayal meant death, Marcus Chen thought he knew every face that belonged in their classified operation. The night was thick with tension, and security was tighter than ever after recent intelligence leaks had cost them 3 good soldiers. When he spotted an unfamiliar figure moving through the restricted zone with suspicious confidence, his training kicked in immediately. The woman appeared to be just another contractor, someone who didn't belong in this level of clearance. Her civilian clothes and calm demeanor seemed completely out of place among the hardened military personnel. Marcus had seen too many good operations compromised by people who weren't supposed to be there.
Without hesitation, he grabbed her by the collar, ready to drag her to security for questioning. "Who ordered you here?" he demanded, his grip tightening as adrenaline surged through his veins. But what happened next would shatter everything Marcus thought he knew about assumptions, judgment, and the hidden warriors who walk among us. The woman's response would reveal a truth so extraordinary that it would haunt him for years to come. A truth about honor, sacrifice, and the invisible scars carried by those who serve in the shadows. Some encounters change everything. This was one of them. The compound buzzed with nervous energy that October evening. Staff Sergeant Marcus Chen had been stationed at Forward Operating Base Vigilant for 8 months, and he'd learned to read the subtle signs that meant trouble was brewing. The way conversations stopped when certain personnel walked by. The increased radio chatter. The way his commanding officer's jaw tightened during briefings. 3 weeks earlier, they'd lost contact with a reconnaissance team during what should have been a routine intelligence gathering mission. The team had been compromised and only 1 soldier made it back alive. The survivors' debriefing revealed that someone had leaked their position to hostile forces. Since then, security protocols had been cranked up to maximum and everyone was on edge. Marcus took his responsibilities seriously. At 28, he'd already completed 2 tours and earned the respect of his unit through his attention to detail and unwavering dedication to protocol. He'd grown up in a military family where following orders and maintaining security wasn't just important. It was sacred. His father had served in Vietnam, and his grandfather had fought in Korea. The Chen family understood that lives depended on doing things the right way. That evening, Marcus was conducting his routine security sweep of the classified operations sector when he noticed her. The woman appeared to be in her early 30s, with dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. She wore civilian clothes, khaki pants and a plain black t-shirt that looked like standard contractor gear. But something about her presence bothered him immediately. She was walking through Section C with a kind of casual confidence that suggested she belonged there. But Marcus knew every person authorized for that level of clearance. He'd memorized faces, names, and credentials as part of his security duties. This woman wasn't on any list he'd seen, and she certainly wasn't part of the scheduled contractor rotation that was supposed to arrive next week. The restricted zone she was moving through contained sensitive communication equipment and classified briefing areas. Only personnel with top-secret clearance and specific mission needs were allowed access. The fact that she seemed completely comfortable navigating the area made Marcus's instincts scream that something was wrong. As he watched her pause near the communications building, Marcus's mind raced through possibilities. Was she a new intelligence officer who hadn't been properly briefed into the system? A contractor who'd gotten lost and wandered into the wrong area? Or something worse, someone who wasn't supposed to be there at all? Given recent events, Marcus couldn't afford to take chances. The memory of the compromised mission was too fresh, and the knowledge that someone with access had betrayed his brothers in arms made him particularly suspicious of unfamiliar faces. He'd rather err on the side of caution and deal with paperwork later than risk another security breach. He approached quickly but quietly, using the tactical movement techniques that had become second nature during his years of service. The woman seemed focused on something near the building's entrance, studying what appeared to be a maintenance panel with intense concentration. Her behavior struck Marcus as odd. If she was authorized to be there, why was she examining infrastructure instead of heading to whatever meeting or briefing she was supposed to attend? When he was close enough to act, Marcus made his move. His training had taught him to control situations quickly and decisively. He reached out and grabbed the woman's collar firmly, not roughly enough to hurt her, but with enough force to establish control and prevent her from running or reaching for anything that might be concealed. "Who ordered you here?" Marcus demanded, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. His grip tightened slightly as he positioned himself to maintain tactical advantage. "This is a restricted area, and you're not on the authorization list." The woman's reaction surprised him. Instead of the startled fear or defensive anger he expected from someone caught in an unauthorized area, she remained completely calm. Her body language didn't suggest panic or guilt. If anything, she seemed almost amused by the situation, which only increased Marcus's suspicion.
I need to see your identification and orders immediately, Marcus continued, maintaining his firm grip while scanning the area to ensure they weren't drawing unwanted attention. You're going to come with me to security for verification. The woman turned slowly to face him, and Marcus was struck by the steadiness in her eyes. They weren't the eyes of someone who was lost or confused. They weren't the eyes of someone who was afraid of being caught doing something wrong. They were the eyes of someone who'd seen things, serious things, and had learned to stay calm under pressure. You're doing your job, she said quietly, her voice carrying a tone that suggested approval rather than irritation. That's good. Security has been too loose around here. Her response caught Marcus off guard. Most civilians would be demanding explanations, threatening to report him to his superiors, or at least showing some sign of distress at being physically detained by military personnel. This woman seemed almost pleased that he was taking security seriously. I don't care if you approve, Marcus replied, though something about her demeanor was making him question his initial assessment. I need answers, and I need them now. Start with your name and what you're doing in this sector. The woman studied his face for a moment, and Marcus had the unsettling feeling that she was evaluating him just as carefully as he was evaluating her. It was a strange reversal of the power dynamic he'd expected to establish. Despite being in his custody, she seemed to be the one conducting an assessment. My name is Sarah Torres, she said finally, and you're right to be suspicious. But you're also about to learn something important about making assumptions. Marcus felt his confidence waver slightly. There was something in her tone that suggested she wasn't just another contractor who'd gotten lost. The way she carried herself, the calm way she'd accepted his challenge, even the way she seemed to be studying the compound's security measures, it all pointed to someone with experience in environments like this, but his training and responsibilities were clear. Regardless of how confident or knowledgeable she seemed, he had a duty to verify her authorization and ensure the security of the compound. Too many soldiers had paid the price for security lapses, and Marcus wasn't going to be responsible for another one. Torres, he repeated, running the name through his mental database of personnel files. I don't have anyone by that name on the current roster, and confidence doesn't equal authorization. You're still coming with me. As Marcus began to guide her toward the security office, he noticed other details about Sarah Torres that didn't fit his initial impression. Her posture was perfect, not the casual stance of a civilian contractor, but the practiced bearing of someone with military training. Her boots were broken in but well maintained, the kind worn by someone who'd spent serious time on their feet in challenging conditions. And despite being detained by an armed soldier, she moved with the fluid confidence of someone comfortable with physical confrontation. These observations created new questions in Marcus's mind, but they also reinforced his decision to follow protocol. If anything, the signs that Torres had military experience made her presence in an unauthorized area even more concerning. A trained person in the wrong place with suspicious intent could do far more damage than a lost civilian. The walk to the security office gave Marcus time to think through the implications of what he discovered. If Torres was indeed former military, as her bearing suggested, then her presence in the restricted area could indicate several possibilities. She might be a consultant or advisor who hadn't been properly briefed into the system. She might be conducting some kind of inspection or evaluation that higher command hadn't communicated to security personnel. Or she might be exactly what his instincts had warned him about, someone who didn't belong. The recent security breach had made everyone paranoid, but Marcus knew that paranoia could be a survival tool in the right circumstances. The fact that Torres seemed to understand and even approve of his caution didn't eliminate the need to verify her credentials and purpose. If anything, her calm reaction suggested she was someone who understood military protocol and should therefore understand why he was taking these steps. As they approached the security building, Marcus caught sight of Torres's reflection in a window and noticed something else that hadn't been immediately apparent in the dim lighting of the restricted area. There were faint scars visible on her forearms, not the random marks of everyday accidents, but the kind of deliberate, precise scarring that suggested serious trauma or possibly specialized training. The discovery added another layer to the mystery of Sarah Torres, but it also increased Marcus's determination to get answers. Whatever her background, whatever her purpose, and whatever secrets she might be carrying, he was going to follow procedure and ensure that his compound remained secure. The lives of his fellow soldiers depended on it, and Marcus had never failed in that responsibility. As they reached the security office door, Marcus realized that he was about to get answers to his questions about Sarah Torres. What he didn't realize was that those answers would change everything he thought he knew about duty, sacrifice, and the hidden warriors who serve their country in ways that most people never see or understand. The security office was a cramped space filled with monitoring equipment, filing cabinets, and the persistent hum of communications gear. Sergeant First Class Rodriguez looked up from his paperwork as Marcus entered with Sarah Torres in tow. Rodriguez had been handling compound security for over a decade, and his weathered face showed the kind of skepticism that comes from years of dealing with people who weren't supposed to be where they'd been found.
"What do we have here, Chen?" Rodriguez asked, gesturing for Marcus to bring Torres to the interview area. A simple metal table with 2 chairs in the corner of the office. "Unidentified individual in Section C." Marcus reported, maintaining his professional demeanor while keeping a careful watch on Torres. "She claims her name is Sarah Torres, but she's not on any authorization lists I've seen. She was examining infrastructure near the communications building." Rodriguez nodded and pulled out a thick binder containing personnel records and clearance documentation. His methodical approach to verification was legendary among the compound security staff. Nothing got past Rodriguez without proper documentation, and he had an encyclopedic knowledge of who belonged where. "Torres Sarah," Rodriguez muttered as he flipped through pages. "Spelling?" "Torres. Sarah replied calmly, settling into the metal chair across from the security desk. A relaxed posture contrasted sharply with the tension Marcus was feeling. Most people being detained for security violations showed at least some signs of stress or concern, but Torres seemed almost at home in the interrogation setting. Rodriguez continued his search while Marcus positioned himself where he could observe both Torres and the door. The standard security protocol was to assume potential hostility until verification was complete, and Marcus wasn't about to let his guard down just because Torres seemed cooperative. "Not finding anything under that name for current operations," Rodriguez announced after several minutes of searching. "Let me check the contractor database and pending arrivals." He moved to his computer terminal and began typing, his fingers moving across the keyboard with practiced efficiency. During the search, Marcus noticed that Torres was quietly observing everything in the security office, not in the obvious way that someone might case a room for escape routes, but with the subtle awareness of someone trained to notice details. She seemed to catalog the placement of equipment, the procedures Rodriguez was following, and even the security protocols Marcus was maintaining during the detention. "Still nothing," Rodriguez said after expanding his search. "Torres, I'm going to need you to provide some documentation of your authorization to be on this base, particularly in restricted areas. If you're here on official business, you should have orders or contractor credentials." Sarah reached slowly into her pants pocket, moving deliberately to avoid any appearance of reaching for a weapon. Marcus tensed slightly, his hand moving instinctively toward his sidearm, but Torres's movements remained calm and non-threatening. "I have identification," she said, producing a slim black wallet, "but it's not going to show up in your standard databases." She handed the wallet to Rodriguez, who opened it carefully. Marcus watched his superior's expression change from routine skepticism to surprise, then to something approaching shock. Rodriguez examined the identification for a long moment, then looked up at Torres with new recognition in his eyes.
"Chen," Rodriguez said quietly, "we need to make a phone call." The change in Rodriguez's demeanor was immediate and dramatic.
The gruff security sergeant who'd been prepared to process another unauthorized contractor was suddenly treating Torres with unmistakable respect. Marcus felt confusion wash over him as he tried to understand what could have caused such a rapid shift in the situation. "Sir?" Marcus asked, uncertain about what was happening but maintaining his professional bearing. Rodriguez was already reaching for his secure phone line, the red handset used only for communications requiring the highest level of security clearance. "Torres, I'm going to need to verify this with JSOC Command. Can you confirm your unit designation?" "Naval Special Warfare Command, SEAL Team 6, Torres replied matter-of-factly, "though I'm sure you understand that specific operational details are classified even from friendly forces."
Marcus felt the floor drop out from under him.
SEAL Team 6, the most elite special operations unit in the American military. The shadowy warriors who handled the missions that officially didn't exist. The operators who worked so far behind enemy lines and in such classified circumstances that most military personnel never even saw them, let alone worked alongside them. "You're telling me," Marcus said slowly, trying to process what he was hearing, "that you're a Navy SEAL?" Torres turned to look at him directly for the first time since they'd entered the security office. Her expression was neither defensive nor boastful, just matter-of-fact acknowledgement of a truth that Marcus was struggling to accept. "Was," she corrected. I completed my service 6 months ago. But some missions don't end just because you leave active duty. Rodriguez was speaking quietly into the secure phone, using code words and verification procedures that Marcus wasn't cleared to understand. The conversation was brief but intense, with Rodriguez asking specific questions and writing down responses in a code that would be meaningless to anyone without proper authorization.
Marcus's mind reeled as he tried to reconcile what he was seeing with his assumptions about Sarah Torres. Everything about her that had seemed unusual or suspicious suddenly made perfect sense.
The confident bearing, the tactical awareness, the scars on her arms, the way she'd remained calm under detention, these weren't warning signs of a security threat. They were the marks of someone who'd operated at the highest levels of military service. Verification confirmed, Rodriguez announced as he hung up the phone. His tone had shifted to one of professional respect, mixed with embarrassment. Chen, we have a problem. Sir, Marcus asked, though he was beginning to understand the magnitude of his mistake.
Miss Torres is here on direct orders from Special Operations Command, Rodriguez explained. She's conducting a security assessment of this compound following the recent intelligence breach. Her presence in Section C was authorized at levels well above our clearance to know. The implications of Rodriguez's words hit Marcus like a physical blow. Not only had he detained a former SEAL who was operating under legitimate orders, but he'd done so while she was investigating the very security problems that had prompted his own increased vigilance.
The irony was almost overwhelming. His attempt to maintain security had interfered with a classified mission designed to improve security.
I didn't know, Marcus said quietly, feeling his professional confidence crumble. Her name wasn't on any lists.
There was no notification through normal channels.
That's precisely the point, Torres said, speaking directly to Marcus for the first time since her identity had been revealed. If I'd been announced through normal channels, this assessment would have been useless.
We needed to see how your security procedures actually work when they encounter something unexpected. Marcus realized that he'd been part of a test, one that he'd both passed and failed simultaneously. He'd correctly identified an unauthorized presence and followed proper procedures for detention and verification. But he'd also made assumptions about what constituted a threat based on appearances rather than actual security protocols. Your response was textbook correct, Torres continued, and Marcus was surprised to hear approval in her voice. You identified someone who didn't belong according to your information, and you took immediate action to secure them and verify their authorization.
That's exactly what you should have done. Rodriguez nodded in agreement. Chen, you followed protocol perfectly.
The fact that Torres was authorized at levels you weren't cleared to know isn't a failure on your part. It's actually proof that our security procedures work when they're properly implemented.
Despite the reassurance, Marcus felt the weight of embarrassment and confusion. He'd physically detained a former member of the most elite special operations unit in the military, someone whose service record probably contained achievements that he couldn't even imagine.
The thought of having grabbed her collar and demanded answers made him feel both mortified and strangely honored to have encountered such a person. The scars, Marcus said suddenly, remembering what he'd noticed during their walk to the security office. The ones on your arms. They're from operations, aren't they? Torres glanced down at her forearms where the faint marks were visible below her rolled-up sleeves.
Some from operations, she confirmed. Some from training that you probably don't want details about. When you operate in environments where capture means torture and death, you learn to handle pain in ways that most people never need to consider. The casual way she mentioned torture and death made Marcus realize how little he understood about the world Torres had operated in.
His own combat experience, while real and dangerous, had been conducted within the relatively structured environment of conventional military operations. What Torres was describing was something else entirely. A shadow world of missions that couldn't be acknowledged and enemies who didn't follow the rules of warfare. What exactly are you assessing? Marcus asked, his curiosity overcoming his embarrassment. Everything, Torres replied. How personnel move through restricted areas, how security protocols are implemented, how quickly threats are identified and responded to, how well information is compartmentalized between different clearance levels. The breach 3 weeks ago suggests that someone with access used their knowledge to compromise an operation, so we need to understand every aspect of how this compound handles classified information. Rodriguez was already pulling out additional documentation, preparing to brief Torres on security procedures and recent concerns. Marcus realized that his unexpected encounter with Sarah Torres was about to become a much larger conversation about compound security and the investigation into the intelligence leak that had cost soldiers their lives. Chen, Rodriguez said, you're going to be part of this assessment.
Your response tonight demonstrates exactly the kind of security awareness we need, and Torres will want to understand how your procedures work in detail.
Marcus felt a mixture of anxiety and excitement at the prospect of working with a former SEAL on a classified security investigation. It was an opportunity to learn from someone who'd operated at the highest levels of military service, but it also meant that his actions and decisions would be scrutinized by someone whose standards were undoubtedly much higher than anything he'd previously encountered.
As Torres began reviewing the security documentation Rodriguez was providing, Marcus realized that his simple attempt to enforce compound security had evolved into something much more significant. He was about to become part of an investigation that could determine not just the source of recent intelligence leaks, but the overall security posture of one of the military's most sensitive forward operating bases.
The woman he'd grabbed by the collar an hour earlier was about to teach him things about military service, dedication, and sacrifice that would change his understanding of what it truly meant to serve his country. Over the following week, Marcus found himself working alongside Sarah Torres in ways he never could have imagined.
What had begun as a security detention had evolved into an intensive education in advanced operational security and counterintelligence techniques. Torres moved through the compound like a ghost, identifying vulnerabilities that had been invisible to standard security protocols, and uncovering patterns that revealed disturbing truths about the recent intelligence breach.
The first revelation came when Torres analyzed the movement logs for the week preceding the compromised reconnaissance mission. While Marcus and the other security personnel had focused on checking credentials and monitoring access points, Torres approached the problem from a completely different angle. She mapped every person who had accessed relevant information systems, cross-referenced their movement patterns with timing of communications, and identified discrepancies that revealed how sensitive intelligence had been gathered and transmitted. "Look at this," Torres said, spreading detailed charts across the table in the secure briefing room that Rodriguez had provided for their investigation. 3 days before the mission was compromised, someone accessed the tactical planning database from a terminal in Building 7. The access was logged under the credentials of Lieutenant Colonel Morrison. Marcus studied the documentation, trying to understand the significance of what Torres was showing him. Morrison was the operations officer who planned the mission. Wouldn't it make sense for him to access those files?
It would, Torres agreed, except Morrison was on leave in Germany visiting his injured brother. His flight records prove he was nowhere near this compound when those files were accessed. The implication hit Marcus like a cold shock. Someone had used stolen credentials to access classified mission planning information while the authorized user was thousands of miles away. It was exactly the kind of sophisticated insider threat that conventional security measures often fail to detect.
"How did they get his credentials?" Marcus asked.
Feeling naive, as soon as the words left his mouth,
Torres pulled out another set of documents, these showing detailed analysis of Morrison's activities in the weeks before his leave began. "Social engineering," she explained. "Someone spent time learning his routines, his passwords, his access patterns. They probably watched him enter his credentials multiple times, or possibly installed keystroke logging software on a computer he used."
The methodical nature of the intelligence gathering made Marcus realize that they weren't dealing with an opportunistic breach or a moment of poor judgment. Someone had deliberately and systematically compromised compound security over a period of weeks or months, gathering the information and access needed to steal critical mission intelligence.
"Who had the opportunity to observe Morrison that closely?" Marcus asked, beginning to understand how Torres approached these investigations. "That's what we're going to find out," Torres replied.
"But first, we need to understand the full scope of what was compromised. This wasn't just one mission. It was a window into how this compound operates, who has access to what information, and how that information flows between different operational units."
Over the next several days, Marcus watched Torres work with a precision and dedication that redefined his understanding of professional excellence. She interviewed personnel with the skill of a trained interrogator, identifying inconsistencies and evasions that revealed far more than the surface-level answers she received. She analyzed computer systems with technical expertise that rivaled the compound's IT specialists, uncovering digital footprints that had been carefully hidden but not entirely eliminated. Most importantly, she taught Marcus to see security through completely different eyes. Instead of focusing primarily on perimeter defense and access control, Torres showed him how to identify the subtle patterns of behavior that indicated insider threats. She demonstrated how social engineering attacks worked, how information could be gathered through seemingly innocent conversations, and how patient adversaries could compromise even sophisticated security systems through careful observation and planning.
"The biggest vulnerability in any security system," Torres explained during one of their evening analysis sessions, "isn't technology or procedures. It's people. We trust the people we work alongside, and that trust can be weaponized by someone who understands how to exploit it."
Marcus was beginning to understand why Torres's assessment had been ordered at such high levels. The intelligence breach that had cost soldiers their lives wasn't just a failure of individual security. It was a systematic compromise that revealed fundamental vulnerabilities in how the compound handled classified information and trusted personnel. "How do you do this?" Marcus asked one evening, as they reviewed surveillance footage from the week of the breach. "How do you maintain this level of suspicion about people you're supposed to trust?" Torres paused in her analysis and looked at Marcus directly. For the first time since he'd met her, he saw something like weariness in her expression. "You learn to separate operational necessity from personal feelings," she said quietly. "In my previous work, trusting the wrong person didn't just mean mission failure. It meant torture and death for you and everyone counting on you." "You developed different instincts. What was it like?" Marcus asked, immediately regretting the question as too personal.
"I mean, operating at that level. The missions you can't talk about." Torres was quiet for a long moment, and Marcus thought she might decline to answer. But when she spoke, her voice carried a weight that made him understand he was hearing something few people ever got to hear. "Imagine spending months preparing for a mission that officially doesn't exist," she began. "You train until every movement is automatic, until you can complete complex operations while exhausted, injured, or under extreme stress. You study target locations until you know them better than your own home. You prepare for contingencies that you hope never happen but probably will." She paused, her attention seemingly focused on the surveillance monitor, but Marcus could see that she was remembering something specific. "Then you insert into hostile territory where everyone wants to kill you, where any mistake means not just your death but the failure of a mission that could save hundreds or thousands of lives. You operate for days or weeks with no backup, no support, no way to call for help if things go wrong. Everything depends on your training, your teammates, and your ability to make the right decisions under impossible pressure." Marcus tried to imagine the level of stress and responsibility Torres was describing, but realized that his own combat experience, while dangerous and demanding, was nothing compared to the isolation and stakes she was talking about. "The hardest part," Torres continued, "wasn't the physical danger, or even the isolation. It was coming back to a world where you couldn't talk about what you'd done, where your service was classified, and your sacrifices were invisible. People thank you for your service without understanding what that service actually involved." "Is that why you're doing this assessment?" Marcus asked.
Because you can't let go of the mission?
Torres turned from the monitor to face him, and Marcus saw something in her expression that he recognized from his own struggles with transitioning between military and civilian life.
"I'm doing this because good soldiers died because of that intelligence breach,"
she said simply.
"Because someone violated the trust that makes military service possible. Because if we don't understand how it happened and fix the vulnerabilities, more soldiers will die."
The conversation was interrupted by Rodriguez entering the briefing room with a manila folder containing new information.
His expression was grim, and Marcus could see that whatever he discovered wasn't good news. "We have a problem," Rodriguez announced, setting the folder on the table in front of Torres. "I've been analyzing the personnel files you requested, and I found something that changes everything we thought we knew about this breach." Torres opened the folder and began examining the contents while Marcus waited anxiously for an explanation. After several minutes of reading, Torres looked up with an expression that Marcus had never seen before. A mixture of anger, disappointment, and determination that suggested they were about to uncover something much more serious than anyone had anticipated. "What did you find?" Marcus asked, though part of him dreaded the answer. "The person who compromised Morrison's credentials and accessed those mission files," Torres said slowly, "wasn't just someone with casual access to the compound. According to these records, they were someone with legitimate high-level clearance who used their authorized access to steal information for unauthorized purposes." Rodriguez nodded grimly. "We're not looking for an outsider who infiltrated the compound. We're looking for someone with official authorization who committed espionage from the inside." The revelation that they were investigating a trusted insider who had betrayed their oath and their fellow soldiers made Marcus feel sick.
But as he watched Torres organize the new information and begin planning their next steps, he realized that this discovery was just the beginning of an investigation that would test everything he thought he knew about honor, duty, and the people he served alongside. The former SEAL who'd entered his life during a routine security check was about to teach him that some of the most dangerous enemies were the ones who wore friendly faces and carried legitimate credentials.
The real investigation was just beginning, and Marcus was starting to understand that the truth they uncovered might be more devastating than the original intelligence breach that had brought Torres to their compound. As Torres began mapping out a plan to identify and catch the insider threat, Marcus realized that his simple act of grabbing her collar had set in motion events that would change not just his understanding of military service, but the security posture of their entire operational command.
The woman he'd mistaken for an unauthorized contractor was about to expose secrets that would reach far beyond their small forward operating base in Afghanistan. The investigation that followed Rodriguez's discovery moved with the calculated precision that Marcus had come to associate with Sarah Torres's approach to complex problems.
Rather than rushing to confront suspects or implement obvious security changes that might alert the insider to their investigation, Torres developed a methodical plan to gather evidence while maintaining the appearance of routine compound operations. "We're going to set a trap," Torres explained during a classified briefing that included Marcus Rodriguez and Major Collins, the compound's executive officer.
"We'll create false intelligence about an upcoming operation and see who tries to access it improperly or communicate it to unauthorized parties." The plan required careful coordination between multiple departments and the creation of convincing but harmless false information that would appear valuable to anyone attempting to gather intelligence for hostile forces.
Torres worked with the operations staff to develop a fictional mission plan that included realistic details about timing, personnel, and objectives, while ensuring that any compromise would not actually endanger real operations.
Marcus found himself assigned to monitor communications traffic and personnel movements during the test period, using skills that Torres had taught him to identify suspicious patterns of behavior. It was methodical, patient work that required attention to detail and the ability to spot anomalies in routine activities.
The breakthrough came on the 4th day of their operation. Marcus was reviewing communication logs when he noticed an unusual pattern in the secure email system.
Someone had accessed the false intelligence they'd planted, but the access hadn't come from any of the personnel who were supposedly planning the fictional mission. "Torres," Marcus called across the monitoring room. "I think we have something." Torres examined the digital evidence that Marcus had flagged, her expression growing more serious as she traced the unauthorized access back to its source. The trail led through several layers of security protocols, but Torres's technical expertise allowed her to follow the digital footprints, despite attempts to obscure them. "Captain Jennifer Walsh," Torres said quietly, reading the name from her analysis of the access logs.
"Intelligence liaison officer assigned to this compound for 8 months. Top secret clearance with special compartmentalized information access." Marcus felt his stomach drop as he recognized the name.
Captain Walsh was someone he'd interacted with dozens of times during his security duties. She was professional, competent, and well regarded by her colleagues. The idea that she could be responsible for the intelligence breach that had killed soldiers was almost impossible to accept.
"Are you certain?"
Major Collins asked, reviewing the evidence that Torres had compiled. "Walsh has an exemplary service record. She's been recommended for promotion and has received commendations for her intelligence work."
"The evidence is clear," Torres replied, spreading out documentation that traced Walsh's unauthorized access to classified systems over a period of several weeks. She used her legitimate clearance to access information outside her assigned responsibilities, then transmitted that information through channels that bypassed normal security monitoring.
What made the betrayal even more devastating was the discovery of Walsh's motivation. Through careful analysis of her financial records and communication patterns, Torres had uncovered evidence that Walsh was being paid by foreign intelligence services for the information she was stealing. It wasn't ideological opposition to American military operations or emotional breakdown under stress. It was simple greed that had led her to betray her oath and her fellow soldiers. "How long has this been going on?" Rodriguez asked, though his tone suggested he already dreaded the answer.
"Based on the digital evidence and financial patterns," Torres said, "approximately 6 months. She's been systematically gathering and selling intelligence about compound operations, personnel assignments, and mission planning.
The reconnaissance mission that was compromised was just the most recent and visible result of her espionage. The scope of Walsh's betrayal was staggering. She had access to information about multiple operational units, ongoing missions, and personnel assignments that extended far beyond the single compromised reconnaissance mission that had brought Torres to investigate. The intelligence she had stolen and sold could have compromised operations across the entire region.
"What's our next step?" Major Collins asked, clearly struggling with the implications of what they'd discovered. "We gather enough evidence to ensure a conviction," Torres replied, "and we do it without alerting Walsh that she's been discovered.
If she realizes we're onto her, she might destroy evidence or flee before we can arrest her." The next phase of the investigation required even more careful coordination. Torres worked with military police and counterintelligence specialists to build a case that would hold up under military justice proceedings while simultaneously ensuring that Walsh couldn't cause additional damage. They monitored her communications, documented her unauthorized access to classified systems,
and traced the financial transactions that proved her connection to foreign intelligence services. Marcus found himself playing a crucial role in the evidence-gathering process. His security responsibilities gave him legitimate reasons to interact with Walsh and observe her behavior without raising suspicion.
Under Torres's guidance, he learned to conduct these interactions as intelligence-gathering operations, carefully noting Walsh's responses to questions and observing her behavior for signs of stress or deception. "She's getting nervous," Marcus reported after a routine security briefing where he'd observed Walsh.
She seemed particularly interested in whether there were any new security procedures being implemented. When Major Collins mentioned increased monitoring of communication systems, she asked several follow-up questions that seemed unusual. Torres nodded as she reviewed Marcus's observations. "She's probably wondering if we've detected her activities. The closer we get to arresting her, the more likely she is to make mistakes or take desperate action." The tension of maintaining the investigation while continuing normal compound operations was exhausting for everyone involved. Marcus found himself constantly watching Walsh during routine interactions, looking for signs that she might be preparing to flee or destroy evidence. The knowledge that she had been responsible for the deaths of soldiers he'd served alongside made it difficult to maintain professional neutrality during their conversations. The final piece of evidence came when Torres intercepted a communication from Walsh to her foreign handlers. Using technical surveillance methods that Marcus wasn't cleared to understand completely, Torres had been monitoring Walsh's attempts to communicate outside normal military channels. The intercepted message not only confirmed Walsh's guilt but also revealed that she was planning to steal additional classified information about upcoming operations.
"We need to move now," Torres told Major Collins during an emergency briefing. "Walsh is planning to access files about Operation Sandstorm tomorrow morning.
If she succeeds in stealing that intelligence, it could compromise a major multi-unit operation and put hundreds of soldiers at risk." The decision was made to arrest Walsh before she could access the Operation Sandstorm files. Military, police working with Torres and compound security would detain Walsh when she attempted to access the classified systems. The arrest would be coordinated with seizure of her personal computer, financial records and communication devices to ensure that all evidence was preserved. Marcus volunteered to assist with the arrest operation, feeling a personal need to be involved in bringing justice for the soldiers who had died because of Walsh's betrayal. Torres agreed to his participation, recognizing that his security expertise and knowledge of compound procedures would be valuable during the operation. The arrest took place at 0630 hours the following morning when Walsh arrived at the intelligence center to access the Operation Sandstorm files. Marcus and the military police team were positioned to prevent escape, while Torres monitored Walsh's computer access to document her final act of espionage before stopping it. When confronted with the evidence of her betrayal, Walsh initially attempted to deny the charges, claiming that her access to classified files was legitimate and that any unauthorized communications were the result of computer system errors. But Torres's documentation was comprehensive and irrefutable, including financial records, communication intercepts, and digital forensics that proved Walsh's guilt beyond any reasonable doubt. The moment when Walsh finally admitted her betrayal was one that Marcus would remember for the rest of his life. Faced with overwhelming evidence and the futility of continued denial, she broke down and confessed to selling intelligence to foreign agents for money to pay gambling debts that had spiraled out of control. "I never meant for anyone to get hurt," Walsh said through tears as military police prepared to transfer her to confinement. "I thought I was just selling routine information that wouldn't matter to anyone. 3 soldiers died because of your routine information," Torres replied with cold fury. "You betrayed everything you swore to protect, and you did it for money." As Walsh was led away in restraints, Marcus felt a complex mixture of relief, anger, and sadness. Relief that the threat had been identified and stopped before more soldiers could be killed. Anger at the betrayal of trust that had made Walsh's espionage possible. And sadness at the realization that someone he'd worked alongside for months had been willing to trade soldiers' lives for money. But as he watched Torres organize the final documentation of the case and prepare for the debriefings that would follow, Marcus realized that this investigation had taught him something important about the nature of military service and the dedication required to protect the people who serve alongside you. The former SEAL who'd entered his life during what he'd thought was a routine security check had shown him that real security required more than following procedures and checking credentials. It required the kind of unwavering commitment to truth and justice that could uncover even the most carefully hidden betrayals and bring dangerous traitors to account for their crimes. The investigation was complete, but Marcus understood that the lessons he'd learned from Sarah Torres about honor, duty, and the price of protecting others would influence the rest of his military career and beyond. 3 weeks after Captain Walsh's arrest, Marcus stood in the same spot where he had first encountered Sarah Torres. The compound had returned to its normal operational rhythm, but everything felt different to him now. The investigation had concluded with Walsh's conviction on charges of espionage and treason, but the impact of what had happened extended far beyond the courtroom proceedings and security improvements that had been implemented. Torres was scheduled to depart that morning, her assessment complete and her recommendations submitted to Special Operations Command.
The formal briefing had taken place the previous day, with senior officers from multiple commands participating via secure video conference to discuss the security vulnerabilities that had been identified and the measures being implemented to prevent future insider threats.
But Marcus had requested a private conversation before Torres left, feeling that there were things that needed to be said away from the formal military environment of briefings and official reports. She had agreed to meet him at the compound's small recreation area, where they could talk without the constraints of rank and protocol that usually governed interactions between personnel of different services and clearance levels.
"I wanted to thank you," Marcus began as Torres approached the picnic table where he'd been waiting, "not just for the investigation and catching Walsh, but for everything you taught me about what security really means." Torres settled across from him at the table, her expression reflecting the thoughtful attention she'd brought to everything during their weeks of working together. "You don't need to thank me for doing my job," she replied. "But I will say that your response to finding me in that restricted area was exactly what good security requires. You saw something that didn't fit, and you acted on it."
"I almost didn't," Marcus admitted. "Part of me wanted to just observe and report rather than confront directly.
It would have been easier and less likely to cause problems if I'd been wrong. But easier isn't always better," Torres said. "Real security sometimes requires taking action that might be uncomfortable or even embarrassing if you're wrong. The important thing is that you followed your instincts in your training, instead of taking the path of least resistance." Marcus thought about the weeks of investigation that had followed his decision to detain Torres and the chain of events that had led to uncovering Walsh's betrayal. If he had simply observed and reported rather than taking direct action, Torres might never have had the opportunity to assess the compound's security posture and identify the insider threat that had been operating undetected for months. "What happens now?" Marcus asked. "With the compound, I mean. Are we going to be under permanent suspicion because of what Walsh did?" Torres considered the question carefully before responding. "Trust is always rebuilt slowly," she said. "The measures we've recommended will make it harder for future insider threats to operate undetected, but they can't eliminate the need for people to trust each other enough to do their jobs effectively. The challenge is finding the right balance between security and operational effectiveness." "And what happens to you?" Marcus asked, realizing that he'd never learned what Torres planned to do after completing her assessment mission. "I go back to consulting work," Torres replied. "There are other compounds, other units, other security challenges that need attention. The skills I developed during my SEAL service translate well to identifying and solving problems that conventional approaches might miss."
Marcus could understand why Torres's unique combination of operational experience and investigative skills would be valuable to military commands dealing with complex security challenges. But he also sensed something in her tone that suggested the transition from active duty to consulting work wasn't entirely satisfying for someone who'd been accustomed to the clear mission focus and team loyalty of special operations.
"Do you miss it?" Marcus asked. "The active duty service, I mean." Torres was quiet for several minutes, looking out across the compound where soldiers were going about their routine duties. When she spoke, her voice carried a weight that Marcus had learned to recognize as the sound of someone accessing memories that were both precious and painful. "I miss the clarity," she said finally. "When you're on a mission, your objectives are clear, your team is defined, and your success or failure is measurable. Everything else, politics, bureaucracy, personal concerns, falls away, and you focus entirely on completing the mission and bringing everyone home safely." She paused, her attention seemingly focused on a group of soldiers conducting equipment maintenance near the motor pool. "Civilian life doesn't have that same clarity. Problems are more complex, solutions are less definitive, and it's harder to know if you're making a real difference." Marcus understood what Torres was describing, though his own transition challenges had been much less dramatic than what someone leaving elite special operations would face. The sense of purpose and mission focus that defined military service was difficult to replicate in civilian occupations, even for those who found meaningful work in related fields. "But this investigation," Marcus said, "helping to catch Walsh and prevent future intelligence breaches, that seems like it has the same kind of clear mission focus you're talking about." Torres nodded thoughtfully. "It does," she agreed.
which is probably why I keep accepting these assessment assignments even though they require me to spend time in environments that remind me of what I've left behind. The honesty of Torres's admission helped Marcus understand something important about the cost of elite military service. The skills and dedication that made someone capable of operating at the highest levels also created dependencies on mission clarity and team loyalty that were difficult to satisfy outside the military environment. What advice would you give someone who wants to develop the kind of investigative and security skills you demonstrated during this case? Marcus asked, thinking about his own career development and the lessons he'd learned during their weeks of working together.
Learn to see patterns that others miss, Torres replied immediately. Most security failures happen because people focus on obvious threats while missing subtle indicators of problems. Develop the patience to analyze situations thoroughly before acting, but also the confidence to act decisively when action is required.
She stood up from the picnic table, and Marcus realized that their conversation was approaching its end. Torres would be leaving within the hour, returning to whatever assignment was next on her schedule, while Marcus would remain at the compound to implement the security improvements they'd developed together.
Most importantly, Torres continued, remember that security isn't just about procedures and technology. It's about people, understanding what motivates them, what pressures they face, and how those factors might influence their decisions about honor and betrayal.
As they walked back toward the compound's main buildings, Marcus reflected on how much his understanding of military service had changed during the weeks since he'd first grabbed Torres's collar in the restricted area. The encounter that had begun with his assumption that she was an unauthorized contractor had evolved into an education about dedication, sacrifice, and the hidden complexities of protecting the people who serve their country.
Will you stay in touch? Marcus asked as they approached the area where Torres's transportation was waiting. I mean, if I have questions about implementing the security improvements we discussed, or if we encounter new challenges. Torres handed him a business card with minimal contact information, just a name, phone number, and email address with no indication of organizational affiliation or official title. Call if you need advice about security issues, she said.
But remember that the most important skills for this kind of work can't be taught through phone conversations. They have to be developed through experience and practice.
As Marcus watched Torres's vehicle disappear through the compound gate, he realized that his simple act of challenging an unfamiliar person in a restricted area had changed not just his understanding of military service, but his career trajectory and personal development as a soldier and security professional. The former SEAL who'd entered his life during what he'd thought was routine security enforcement had taught him that real protection required more than following procedures.
It required the kind of unwavering commitment to truth and justice that could identify hidden threats and bring dangerous traitors to account for their betrayals. 6 months later, Marcus received orders assigning him to a specialized security unit that conducted investigations and assessments for military commands dealing with complex insider threats. The skills he'd learned during his weeks with Sarah Torres had been noted in his performance evaluations, and he was being given opportunities to develop those capabilities further in assignments that would take him far beyond the routine security duties he'd previously performed. As he prepared for his new assignment, Marcus often thought about the lesson Torres had taught him during their final conversation, that the most important security measures weren't technological or procedural, but human, understanding people, their motivations, their pressures, their capacity for both honor and betrayal, was the key to protecting the institutions and individuals that military service was designed to defend. The woman he'd mistaken for an unauthorized contractor had changed his understanding of what it meant to serve with honor, and that lesson would guide the rest of his military career and the investigations that would define his contribution to protecting the people who served alongside him.
Sometimes the most important encounters begin with the simplest actions, and Marcus would never forget that his willingness to challenge someone who didn't seem to belong had opened the door to learning from one of the most dedicated warriors he would ever have the privilege to know. The investigation was over, but the legacy of what Sarah Torres had taught him about duty, honor, and the price of protecting others would continue to influence his service for years to come.